Good morning and happy Mother's Day. Just want to take a minute and say that. Mothers, I hope that your families will honor and appreciate you today and eat everything that you fix them for lunch. I mean, let's think about this for just a minute. I wish we had time to talk about the worst Mother's Day presents ever. Because, let's be real, it probably happens. I mean, mothers do just about everything for us. And then all of a sudden we're expected to do something on our own, and then we kind of fail. But I've decided that I would not fail. I know I found the best Mother's Day card that sums up the sentiment of what I would want to say. You know, sometimes it's hard to stand there in those aisles and read over those cards and find that perfect one. But today, here's the card I would give. The card I would give, it says, all moms gave birth to a child, except my mom, she gave birth to a legend. High five, Mom. I think that sums me up pretty well. But for real, you know, seriously, guys, gals, men, women, honor your mothers. Tell them how much you love and appreciate them, because you'll never know when they're not going to be there. Never know when they'll be gone. Mother's Day is kind of special to me, though. By the way, this is not going to be a Mother's Day lesson. I'm just throwing that out there. Mother's Day is special to me because it was Mother's Day 17 years ago that I came to Beltline for the first time. It was 17 years ago that I came as a summer intern, and this has been such a wonderful place that I've been here ever since. Y'all have tolerated me and put up with me, so I appreciate that. You know, the job I have is difficult sometimes. It's difficult to call it a job because I really enjoy what I do. I enjoy the teenagers that I get to work with. I enjoy the time that we spend together. And you know, and the interesting thing is, I've been here long enough to where most of the kids in the youth group weren't even born when I came. And so I've gotten to see them grow up. I believe I have a huge vested interest in them and wanting them to succeed. You know, I want them to succeed not so much in their careers. If they succeed in their careers, I'll be proud of them and I'll be happy for them. But I want them to succeed in their spiritual walk with God. I want them to succeed and be able to go to heaven. That's why this Mother's Day, I want to spend some time talking to you about parenting. You know, there's a lot of times I've stood before you and preached different lessons. And there's been a lot of times I've been afraid to stand up here and talk about parenting too much. Simply because I'm in a situation where someone might say, Scott, you don't have a clue what it's about. Your oldest is only now 13. You know, I'm sure I'm going to make mistakes as a parent. But I believe the Bible has plenty to say on what parents should look like, about what they should do. You know, over the past 17 years, I've worked with a lot of parents, and I've seen a lot of things. And from that, I've gained a whole wealth of knowledge and a whole wealth of wisdom. And this morning, I want to try to share some of that with you. You see, my ultimate goal for this youth group, for the young people that usually feel this, I'm not going to take it personal that, you know, they're sitting somewhere else today because they're honoring their moms. That's good. But I have a huge goal that I want to know that their soul is safe. I want to know that they're going to go to heaven. And sometimes it might even take a little boldness on my part to say some things that aren't popular and to say some things that, well, this might offend some people. But you see, sometimes it has to happen. Because to me, the only achievement in life that will truly matter is to know that they will be going to heaven. And we have to be on the same page. So today I'm going to give you three simple things, just three simple things that I want you as parents to do to make sure, or to help your child make it to heaven. All three of them will be easy to remember. They all start with the letter D. But let's start in Luke chapter 2. Luke chapter 2, verses 41 through 51. Now I'm going to take just a minute and read a few of these verses here. Starting in verse 41, it says, Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he became 12, they went up there according to the custom of the feast. And as they were returning, after spending the full number of days, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. But his parents were unaware of it, but supposed him to be in the caravan and went a day's journey. And they began looking for him and among their relatives and acquaintances. And when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem looking for him. Then after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. You see, we look at this passage. This is going to be the first example of a little game called hide and seek. Not one of the real first examples. I believe Adam and Eve actually took care of that one. But we have this example of where Mary and Joseph took their son to Jerusalem, and then all of a sudden they can't find him. Now, when we look at this, there's a few things I want us to think about. You know, I realize it's difficult to travel with children. I realize, by the way, I gave my wife the best Mother's Day present ever. She got to spend a weekend away from me. Now, I appreciate her. As a youth minister, I travel a lot with retreats and stuff. And she's home with all 3 kids, so I let her have that this weekend. But you see, I get it. Getting 3 children dressed this morning was a little difficult, but I managed. Their clothes are on right side out. They're actually clean clothes, so that's good. But today, you know, traveling's not a big deal. They have technology that they can work with, an iPad or an iPod. But the trip to Jerusalem was to fulfill a custom that all Jewish men were required to make the trip of one of the 3 major feasts. And we see this one was the Feast of the Passover. Now, the distance from Galilee to Jerusalem was around 70 miles. And moving with a caravan, I'm not real sure how long that actually took. But some people estimate that this trip of about 70 miles took about 4 days. So here we are traveling with children 4 days for something that was a requirement for their worship. I don't know that it was very convenient. And sometimes we as Christians make our worship about convenience. The first letter, D, that we'll look at this morning is the letter D for desire. Parents, I need you to desire worship. I need you to desire worship in the presence of your children so that they will desire worship. So I'm going to ask you a question. Why is it we can see Joseph and Mary take a 4-day trip to fulfill their requirement for worship, yet we allow so many things to get in our way? We allow them to get in our way. We make a conscious choice to say, it's not important to be there today because I've got this going on. Fill in the blank, whatever it is. Now I'm talking about how Sunday is no longer considered a sacred and holy day to worship the Lord. Sunday has become a time of baseball, of soccer, of dance, you name it. So many different things, we allow it to take the place. And let's be real for just a minute. There are a lot of tournaments not being played today only because it's Mother's Day. And what we've begun to do is honor a holiday over our Father and Creator. When we begin to look at this, I'll never forget a story that I heard once about the legendary coach John Wooden. In 1973, UCLA won the national title. In 1974, they were upset in the Final Four by NC State. Athletic director at UCLA, J.D. Morgan, called Coach Wooden and his assistant coaches to his office. He told them, he said, we have received a phone call from one of the local television stations to play a huge game against NC State. It was huge because they thought it would be a ratings monster because of the upset that had just happened the following NCAA tournament. As they laid out the terms of the offer, there was one big hitch. The game would be played on Sunday afternoon. They laid out the terms and they looked to the assistant coaches. And the assistant coaches knew that for Coach Wooden, Sunday was a day of worship for him and his family, and that they never missed a Sunday at the church that they attended in Santa Monica, California. The athletic directors looked at the 2 assistants and asked what they thought about the offer. Both the assistants said what we hear a lot today. They said, we would prefer not to play on Sunday, but we have to do whatever, we'll do whatever we have to do. But they knew it wasn't really their opinion that mattered. It was Coach Wooden's. Coach Wooden looked at J.D. and said, J.D., if you want to schedule the game on Sunday afternoon, go ahead. I just won't be there. You see, we look at Coach Wooden as a man who achieved great things, but he had a principle about him. He said that day is God's and nobody else's and nothing else's. Parents, I'm asking that out of you. I want our kids to understand it matters and its importance. And let me give you a little shock to your system. From the day they're born to the day they turn 18 and leave your home, you have 936 weeks. Tell me which one of those weeks is less important than another. They're all important because we only get one shot at this. We only get one time to raise them to know what God is and who He is. After all, don't we read about priorities in Matthew 6 and verse 33? I'm glad Hinton led that song. Seek ye first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. I wonder why we have such a difficult time with this text. Why is it we have a difficult time? I'm not even going to lie to you. I can't even begin to tell you how much it bothers me to have a group of teens sitting here on Sunday morning, which they're playing their own game of sardines to see how they can fit 27 kids on one row. But then on Sunday night, we might have enough to fill two. Why doesn't it matter? You say, and it's just sometimes comical to think about how they try to fit in there. We reason in our minds that it's okay to celebrate birthdays, it's okay to celebrate this and all that. Sunday morning's not important. But I'm going to tell you, as a youth minister, I want you to understand every single time we can get them together with God's people is important. And it matters because we only get one shot. We think about Wednesday night. So many times we don't have many people in Bible class because homework has taken the priority. But I'm going to tell you, studying God's Word will be more important than any book they can ever study in their schools. It's the one that will carry them for life, that will carry them to eternity and into eternity. The bottom line is simply this, parents. My desire for worship must supersede my desire for anything else. When it doesn't, we make gods out of whatever takes its place. Parents, your desire to place a priority on worship has a huge impact on your children. Your children are your responsibility, and their spiritual growth is up to you. We look at Joseph and Mary and the example that they set to take that journey with Jesus. No matter the inconvenience, they did it because it was a priority. Let's look in 1 Samuel chapter 2. I'm bothered by this one because this is an example of when we first begin to see about the preacher's kids. I got 3 of them. So this worries me a lot when I read through this. It troubles my heart a little bit because as I'm calling you guys out today, this is all pressure on me now when I look at the preacher's kids. In 1 Samuel chapter 2, we read about Eli. Eli was a high priest. If you remember, Eli was the priest that Hannah, who prayed for the son, took her son to because she gave him over to the Lord. He was a high priest, which meant he was second in command, second in authority to the king. The high priest often served for a lifetime in the position and then often handed it down to their children. When we encounter his 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, they are not boys, but young, wicked men. The ESV actually uses the word worthless men. You don't read that a lot in the Bible. You don't read a lot of people being referred to as worthless. So when I think about Hophni and Phinehas, I know some of those little kids out there right now are thinking about Phineas and Ferb already. And no, I don't know if he had a triangle-shaped head. But it's not the same guy. What were they doing? Why were they so wicked? Well, what they were doing is they were using their power to take the choice cuts of the meat offering that they were bringing. Then when people would bring these offerings, if they didn't want to give up the offering or give them that choice cut, if somebody said no, then they say, okay, we'll take it by force. So then not only that, but they're bullying the people about it. And then past that, they're also having sex with the women who served at the entrance of the tent meeting, which some will refer to that same thing as idolatry. So it would not be far-fetched to think about these guys being involved in idol worship. You see, Eli heard all the rumors of the people and the word of the Lord, yet he did nothing. And by nothing, I say, he gave them a lecture. In short, Eli failed to discipline Hophni and Phinehas. Yes, he did confront them and give them a lecture, but he actually did nothing. He could have taken them from that priestly rotation. He could have told them to confess and repent. He could have banned them from the priesthood, but yet he did nothing. You see, discipline is a necessary part of life used to guide in the right direction. Discipline is necessary. In fact, turn over with me, if you would, to Hebrews chapter 12. You see, Hebrews chapter 12, we don't read it a lot. And when we do, we stop at about verse 2, because it's therefore we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. It's talking about the examples of those that are talked about in chapter 11. But we go on, and look what we begin to see in verse 6. It says, "For the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and chastises every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline?" You see, discipline, sorry guys, this is where I go from them to picking on you. Discipline is important. To fail to discipline our children is to sin against God. Proverbs 13 and verse 24 said, "He who withholds his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him diligently." Now, I'm not saying use a rod that's going to break their spine. That's too much. But what I am saying is discipline that changes nothing is worth nothing. Discipline is different for every child because every child is different. One thing to never forget about discipline is that it has to cost them more than it costs you. I like to laugh and hear some of the stories that my wife tells. In fact, when she's talking about her father-in-law, she's going, "This is not even the same man that I grew up with," because of how he, dotes on our children. She talks about one day she got in trouble for being constantly tardy to her classes. She was tardy because she was talking in the hall. Well, her daddy said, "All right, you're late one more time. I'm going to come walk you to class." I want you to think about that for a minute. Parents, how would your child feel if you came and walked them hand in hand to their next class? He never actually had to do it because she knew he meant business. And the reason is because he had set other prior precedents. One day they got in the car to go to church one Sunday morning, and he looked at her and said, "Rachel, where's your Bible?" I said, "I don't know, I forgot it." He said, "Okay." They got in the car and went on to church. That next day, they get ready to go to softball practice. She runs, jumps in the car, ball and glove in hand, bat in hand. Her daddy says, "Go put it up." "Why? We're going to softball practice." He said, "You don't go to church without your Bible because it's the most important tool you have." So he made her go to practice that day without her equipment because he wanted her to understand about importance, about priorities. I'm going to pick on Jake. I had to do this to him, and look at him. He's already cringing and embarrassing. I debated on whether to tell this, but I figured I'd go ahead and have a little fun with it. Yeah, Jake got in trouble for talking too much in math class at school. I know that's probably a shock coming from me that he's talking too much. So he gets in trouble on a Friday, and I said, "We're going to handle this on Tuesday because we're out of school on Monday." So Tuesday, he comes bebopping into math class, and there I sat, right in the chair right behind him. He wanted to crawl under that chair. But I haven't had to go back because he understands what his job is. And I can't tell you how many times I've been disappointed to sit with a parent and hear something like this. "Scott, I just can't get them to do this or get them to do that." I remember one particular time where a parent was saying, "I can't get my child to go to church." And I just asked a simple question, "Do you pay for the car?" "Well, yeah." "Do you pay for the cell phone?" "Well, yeah." And I said, "You can't figure that out?" And this is the reply I got. "Scott, I wish I was strong enough to do that." What? It's so important. So important. Think about what James Dobson said. He says this, "When your children are young, they will test the limits. If you tell them not to cross a certain line, they will cross it to see what will happen. At this point, your children are looking for a fight. You ought not disappoint them." When I hear that about looking for a fight, I've heard parent after parent say, "I'm just tired of fighting with them to get them to go to church." Do you ever get tired of fighting with them to make them go to school? Do you ever get tired of fighting with them about cleaning their room? Do you ever get tired of fighting with them about making right decisions? No, you don't. So why give up on one thing that matters? It takes discipline. When we begin to look at discipline, I want us to understand how important it is. Finally, if your ears aren't pinned back enough, let's finish it on out here. When we look at Exodus chapter 2, we see the baby in the basket. Now, some of you are always saying, I get the baby in the basket joke now. Yeah, it's okay. All right, Exodus chapter 2. We begin to read about Jochebed and what she did with Moses when Moses was born. You see, she hid him for 3 months. And when it got to the point where she couldn't hide him anymore, Pharaoh wanted the death of all the Hebrew children. But I can tell you amazing things happen when people fear God. Because if you go back into chapter 11, you begin to see where, into chapter 1, you'll begin to see where all the midwives had begun to hear about this. So what were they doing? They were helping to deliver the children and to take care of them. Because his decree said when they're born, if it's a girl, she can live, the boy kill it. And so they began to do this. So after that happened, he kind of intervened even more. Jochebed put Moses into a basket and set him in the river so that he might be found by the daughter of Pharaoh. Jochebed cared for Moses until the age that he went to live in the palace with Pharaoh and his daughter, which was probably about age 5. You may ask, why do I point her out? I point her out because she only got about 5 years with him. And after that 5 years with him, it is evident that she took advantage of it. It's evident because a lot of times we say little children don't get a whole lot out of church. I'll never forget when Judd was 2 years old. I remember Brad White coming forward down here, needing some prayers, and I'm sitting on this pew right here. Well, I get up and I go to sit down by Brad. And when I sit down up here, Judd just freaks out. And he parents, you know what I'm talking about, the long inhale where they are about to let out a scream. They go, oh, and that's what I went. And so I pick him up, take him out, and I meet Rachel outside. And I'm like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know why he's upset. Well, after church, Rachel comes to look back and looks at me, and she's just got this weird, funny smirk on her face. She said, Scott, when I got him out in the hall, he just kept yelling, I don't want to be baptized. I don't want to be baptized. At 2 years old, he got it. He thought that's what that meant. When we look at Jochebed and her time spent with Moses, I believe she took every opportunity to instill in him who God is. Why do I know that? Because he was sent to a house that believed in a multitude of gods. Because when you look at the plagues, each one of those plagues that was sent to Egypt was an assault on one of their particular gods. Moses grew up to be a man of God. One of the mistakes you will see he made was because of what his mother taught him. You'll see one of the mistakes he made, and when he began to run, is when he killed one of the Egyptian soldiers for beating a Hebrew slave. Because he knew something wasn't right. The last letter D that I'll throw at you this morning is the word direction. The word direction. It is important from a very young age to set in motion the major goals for their life. I'm going to ask you a question. And I'm going to challenge you parents when you get home to do this, to see if you will. The question is this: is your goal for your child heaven? I'm sure if we were sitting here today, we're going to answer that in the affirmative because we're sitting in a church setting. That's what you do in a church setting. You answer the Jesus ways. But when we begin to look at it, can you put on paper and write down what you are doing to make that actually happen? I know some people place high priority on getting a high ACT score. So what do? They pay for tutoring after weeks and weeks and weeks. Why? Because they want to achieve that goal. They want their kid to get a scholarship so they can get in college. Nothing wrong with that either. So what do? They press them to work hard, to do their work so they can study and learn good work habits. But what do we do with the goal of trying to get our children to heaven? As a youth ministry tries to get parents involved, I appreciate so much a couple of weeks ago when Steve made the statement that some of the things he wanted to see change at Beltline is getting parents more involved here than they are everywhere else. I go visit schools and I see parents, they're so thick, man, you can't swat them like gnats because they're all over the place. They're helping with this project and that project. And then down here at Faith Boulevard, we close classes because we can't get parents to teach. Teaching your children what God says is the number one thing you could ever do in your entire life. And when we spend so much time on everything else, our children miss the point. Proverbs 22 and verse 6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." You see, this word train implies a standing side by side, engaging in a learning process with a specific end in mind. And I hope that end is heaven. I hope it is heaven. I added it up the other day. Since I've been here, 218 students have graduated. Only about 60% of those are still faithful. I don't like that number. And it's up to you guys to lead them. Now, I say this in front of all these teenagers and these kids because I want them to know what your expectation is. Your expectation as a parent is to lead them to heaven, not lead them to a career. That's fine and good, but it has its place. But heaven should be the number one goal. Whew, I'm done. Parents, I don't know if I can spell it out any plainer than I have this morning. There are so many other examples in the Bible that talk about what a parent should look like. So I'm going to ask you, if you're a parent that has yet to obey the gospel, what are you waiting for? Your children are looking and watching to see what your priorities are. What are you waiting for? That is one of the best ways to lead your children and your family is by putting Christ on in baptism to start that walk. If you've been failing or struggling as a parent and would like prayers of the church, we'll have an awesome opportunity to do that now as we stand and as we sing.